Hello, bonsoir, and welcome to the Get French Football News Show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Rich Allen and Jeremy Smith. International Week brings with it a series of pretty irrelevant, glorified fact-finding missions. But what did Didier Deschamps find out this Friday, and what can be discovered when they head to Russia tomorrow night? All of that and more after the latest headlines. Les Bleus kicked off the international week with a disappointing defeat to Colombia, who came back from 2-0 down to win 3-2. Olivier Giroud and Thomas Lemar gave the home side a deserved lead, but goals from Luis Muriel, Radamel Falcao and a Juan Quintero penalty helped the South Americans claim victory. Afterwards, manager Didier Deschamps claimed this would be a wake-up call for his team and an example of what can happen if they let their standards drop again. The national side head to St. Petersburg, where they will take on Russia in their final friendly before the end of the league season. In other news, L'Equipe posted an interview today with a woman who has claimed to be a victim of repeated domestic abuse by a French-based footballer. In one extract, the woman said, "When he would see me cry after having hit me, he'd apologise, then force me to make love to him. I think it turned him on." Elsewhere, Alassane Player has pledged to donate 1% of his salary to worthy causes. In a similar effort to Juan Mata's Common Goal charity, the 25-year-old will use that cash raised to charities chosen by the club's staff. And that's all for now. But for your latest news in the world of French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com. Follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start this week, unsurprisingly, with Les Bleus, and an effort against Colombia throws up a lot of questions, some good and some bad in this one, Rich. But what did you think to the match overall?
I think first and foremost, we shouldn't be going into this thinking this is an absolute disaster, World Cup hopes in tatters. You know, it's not a great performance over the 90 minutes. But you know, these friendlies going into the World Cup, generally results don't matter. You have to look at the performance. You have to look at the performance of the players who perhaps don't have those nailed on either starting roles or roles within the squad. So yeah, not a hugely great performance. But I think from it there were a few things that we learned, a few things that we already knew. We have certainly learned that I think they're all hoping and praying Benjamin Mendy can get that return and make that left back rightfully his, because you know Kurzawa has fallen off the radar. Lucas Hernandez is completely untested, although we hope he'll get some minutes at least against Russia. Jordan Amavi is still pretty raw, not perhaps the most consistent, and then Luca Dean, who seems to be perhaps the man leading the charge to rival Benjamin Mendy if he doesn't make the squad. You know, he tries, he works hard, but he's just not got that quality. And I think we saw in that game on Friday, the fullbacks really are the weak point of that squad. You know, Sidibe, as great as he can look going forward, we saw in that game, as we've done countless other games, both for the country, caught out when it matters at the back. I thought it was the second goal. I think the Falcao goal. You know, he was caught out horribly out of position. Not helped, I don't think, by Varane and Umtiti not having their best games either. I don't think their link up between the pair of them was particularly strong. It didn't seem like they'd got that connectivity that you'd expect your centre-back partnership to have. But big question marks over the defence. I think looking into the midfield, not sure N'Golo Kante had his best game. You know, shock of shocks. You know, it's something that you barely see. He did give the ball away. Unfortunately for him, it then led to a goal. He didn't have a particularly strong game. I don't think Matuidi had a particularly strong game. In terms of bright sparks, though, to look at it more positively, yes, you've got a typical Olivier Giroud performance. Works hard, battles hard, gets you a goal, can't ask for anything more. And then I thought Lamar and Mbappe, I thought had good games as well. I still would like to see Lamar played slightly more centrally. Give that a go. Maybe that will happen in the game against Russia. But I thought as well Mbappe played really well. I think it's important that he maintains that confidence going into this tournament. We sort of started to see it after a little drop of form, I think, with PSG. We're starting to see that return at club level. If he can carry that into internationals as well, all the better. So there's a lot there, I think, for Deschamps to take into the next game and beyond. But you can't disguise the fact that it's a disappointing defeat. But let's look at the bigger picture, I think, is the answer to that.
Absolutely, but we'll almost in contrary to that, we'll sort of break it down to the two parts of the teams that really, one really shone in the first half, where they were excellent, especially in the first 25 minutes, and then sort of teetered off in the second half. But that first half performance, especially from the strike force, Jeremy, I mean, especially that second goal where there's a link-up play between Griezmann and Mbappe and Lamar, all sort of in central areas, all linking together neatly with quick passing and great ability, and a lovely finish from Lamar at the end of it. It was just a glimpse of exactly what three very talented players that they've got, and they've got even more on the bench, which should frighten everyone. Exactly the kind of excellence that this front and attacking side can be when they're at the best.
Yeah, I think it's sort of no secret that France are a sport for choice in terms of young attacking talent. I think one of the possible frustrations for Deschamps is that despite having all of that choice, actually at times he's, because of either injuries or suspensions or players pushing for moves, it's rare that he's had all of them all fit and raring to go at the same time. And I think because of that, there hasn't been too much consistency in terms of being able to sort of play around with the same maybe 3 or 4 players for each international meeting. But Lamar and Mbappe both look really bright. Griezmann didn't have such a great game, I thought, but his back heel in the sort of second to last pass, I think, leading up to that second goal, was I thought a little bit of genius. Just the awareness that not just to sort of backheel it to Mbappe, but kind of backheel it to his left as Mbappe's running from his right, just so that it was sort of perfectly weighted and right into his path. It was absolutely fantastic and really shows what those forward players can do. And I thought Dembele as well, when he came on, looked pretty lively as well. L'Equipe is saying today that against Russia they might go with a 4-3-3, starting with Dembele, Mbappe, and Martial. So that should be interesting, giving Dembele a bit longer, Mbappe playing centrally, and Martial having a rare chance to play from the start rather than some Portuguese egotist throwing him on just for the last 10 minutes or so. With Giroud, I'm actually starting to change my mind about Giroud. I'm not about Giroud himself, but about whether he should start. I love him. I think he always does a job for France, which can't be said about probably any other player in the team, frankly. And you can understand why Deschamps always goes for him, because he is reliable and he does, the way he plays does bring whoever's playing in attacking roles around him into the game. But when you see that second goal, even though Giroud was on the pitch at the time, you do sort of get excited about the idea of just having a sort of speedy, skillful front three and what that could do. So while I've always been sort of very pro Giroud starting, I'm now starting to wonder whether possibly he should, unfortunately for him, be the plan B. I'm still not sure on that one.
it does start putting that question in mind, because what you think is, if you take off Giroud and maybe play Mbappe further forward with Griezmann still behind him, it gives you an opportunity to play a Dembele, a Coman if he was fit, a Tovan in there as well, or someone else. That there's so many options in those attacking areas to have such a free-flowing, movement-based sort of team where Griezmann can go up top for a little bit, or Lamar can come centrally and push Mbappe wider to try and give him more space. It would give you start thinking, giving nightmares. And then Giroud is still an option there for you as well. You could maybe 65 minutes, you bring him on. He's a player who's used to that in the last couple of years with Arsenal and now at Chelsea as well, as sort of being more of a secondary striker, really a second option. And he's great at that as well. And I think he'd revel in that for the French side, whether he is starting or on the bench. I think he will be an important cog to this team. But there's still plenty of questions about the supposed weak area really of France, and that's the back four really. Rich, I mean, mentioned it briefly in your sort of intro as well, with talking about the game itself, but it's a strange, it's the centre back pairing you would expect. There's not really much question that anyone else will really get ahead of those two come the start of the tournament. You'd think Koscielny would be probably a bit part player. Presnel Kimpembe won't probably start, hasn't really got enough maybe experience under his legs compared to the other two in big games especially. But out wide, it was an interesting one. Sidibe was pretty good going forward, but I don't think that we ever have a suggestion that he's not a bad player going forward. Dean was the decision to play him at left back. He's obviously not a starter for Barcelona, and the question of Layvin Kurzawa not being in the squad as well. He's not a starter for Paris Saint-Germain, and it's whether you throw someone in who's inexperienced. What do you think we can learn from this game coming up, at least anyway, for the wing backs? And what sort of mix would you like to see in this defence to try and freshen things up and give some food for thought for Deschamps?
Well, I think the Russia game, they have to, and it seems like they will be. You have to go with Pavard and Hernandez. It's pointless picking Hernandez now if you're not going to give him, at the very least an hour in one of the games. Now, he didn't play a minute in the Colombia game, so he has to play from the start against Russia and give him an hour. Give him at least an hour. Give him the full 90 minutes if needs be, just to see what he can do. We need to see those options. It's absolutely no guarantee that Mendy's going to be fit. If he's back for Manchester City, it certainly doesn't mean he's then World Cup fit. So Deschamps also almost has to prepare for the fact that Mendy's not going to be available. Now, it seems that the French national team medical staff had a quick checkup on Mendy when he was over watching the game on Friday. Whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know. Whether they want to get their own update. Maybe they feel that Manchester City might be keeping them in the dark on how well he's doing. So they're not pressuring him to come back too early when Manchester City won't want him to necessarily come back too early. I don't know. But he has to think, right, Mendy might not be available here. So what's my backup plan? It seems Dean is fairly set as being in that squad. So it then seems to be a race between Hernandez, Kurzawa, and probably Amavi for the backup spot. I'm going to be self-confessed. I've not seen a lot of Lucas Hernandez play, so I can't comment on his qualities. But it's going to be nice to see someone new given a go. I'm not sold on Luca Dean. I'm certainly not sold on Kurzawa. I think he's really struggled to kick on, arguably since he joined PSG. He had that first season where he didn't get all the, he'd obviously played and was a regular for Monaco, moved to PSG where he expected to be the regular, and then found himself playing second fiddle to Maxwell. I think ever since then, he's really struggled to kick on. There should be no doubt the player that we saw at Monaco right now, Layvin Kurzawa, should be one of the world's best left backs. At the minute, you probably couldn't make a case for him being in the top 10. And if France really do have visions of winning the World Cup, they need players in specialist positions who are in the top 10 in the world. Mendy, yes, he is, but sadly it seems that he's either going to go but not be completely 100%, or just not go at all. So it's important that Lucas Hernandez gets a run out. Because he might have to be a viable option going into the World Cup. Right back then is a whole world, a whole other world of problems, because we've got Sidibe, who seems to be nailed on as your first choice right back, and we've got Benjamin Pavard. And then who else have we got? There was talks of, I know he's come back to Ligue 1 in a strong way, but there's talks of Debuchy, for example. Well, really, I admire how well he's come back from a difficult time at Arsenal, joined Saint Etienne and played really well. I don't know if that's World Cup quality though. And then aside from that, there's nothing.
Okay.
I really, really, really can't see what options we've got at right back aside from those sort of two incumbents. Now, my personal choice between the two, I'd probably go for Pavard. I think he gives you slightly more in defence. Yes, it takes slightly from the attack, but as we've seen with the players in attack, we're not short of problems there. So I would rather Deschamps look at, well, let's strengthen that defence. And I think Pavard over Sidibe is the answer there.
This is the interesting thing about using, hopefully, giving Lucas Hernandez and Pavard a go from the start in this one, is that both of them, like you mentioned, are more defensive and both are capable of playing centre-back. So if they continue to have the finish with the good seasons they've having, obviously Lucas Hernandez might be getting more of a chance at left back, given that Felipe Luis has been injured, is out with a broken leg for Atletico. It gives him a real chance to have a lot of game time before the tournament starts as well. And you just think that with players like that who are capable of playing centre back, who can play the wider positions as well and still support and defend and cover better, that especially in a tournament format against very strong sides that you expect to face once you get down to the quarterfinals, semi-finals, where France should definitely be aiming. Having those kind of options at least and seeing how they would do in those scenarios will be ideal, really, and seeing whether it might be worth throwing them in there. But another contentious point, at least on the game on Friday, Jez, was that midfield. Unfortunately, excusing N'Golo Kante, is allowed a bad game after about a million really good games, really. So he's excused in this one. But there was a lot of questions thrown about Blaise Matuidi, especially. He's not a regular starter for Juventus. He started this one for a long period as well. It took them it took Deschamps a good while to take him off the field, where he wasn't playing the best of games. But they then replace him with Paul Pogba, who's not in great form. You look at the other midfielders on there. Corentin Tolisso has played pretty well, but is also very much a second option at Bayern Munich, and Adrien Rabiot, who's had a bit of a down year after really, really excelling the season before. It's strange that they seem to have plenty of options in midfield, but no one quite hitting the ground at the moment.
I think, taken with the defence and arguably even goalkeeper at the moment, I think that all these people that are saying France should be walking the World Cup, they should have walked the Euros, Deschamps is really underperforming. I think that's a very simplistic way of looking at it. I think they've got a deep squad, but I certainly don't think that in defence and midfield it's necessarily approaching the best squads in the world. I still think, certainly Spain, Germany, Brazil on their day are stronger. And I think the midfield at the moment kind of proves that. Matuidi, if it was my choice, he wouldn't be, possibly a useful squad player, especially with his experience and the spirit and stuff, but I wouldn't be thinking of him at all in terms of first team. Pogba is the Pogba that he's been for the last few years. Ridiculously frustrating, because you feel that if he really wanted to concentrate on football instead of YouTube clips and different color hair, he could be the best player in the world, but he still shows it far too rarely, and again this year hasn't been helped by a certain club manager. But it's still, Pogba shouldn't be up for debate. It's ridiculous that frankly, I would, based on the last few internationals, I would start Tolisso ahead of Pogba, which is crazy because Pogba, as I said, should be, any team in the world should be able to build a team around Pogba. So I think he's underperforming consistently for club and country. Tolisso, I think, has had a very good season for Bayern Munich. considering it's his first season with a big club, first season in a new country, disruption of a change of manager during that time, and the new manager who came in, I think dropped him at first, and he's fought his way back into the team. So to me, Tolisso is ahead on points of most of the others in the midfield role, with the season he's had and with his performances when given a chance for France. But yeah, apart from that, I mean, Kante, I think, yes, he gave away the ball in the lead up to the second goal for Colombia, but generally, I think he can be very, very much relied on either as a sort of defensive sentinel or able to sort of be the box-to-box player. And as you said, Rabiot again should be up there, but certainly not Kurzawa standards. But you feel this year he hasn't kicked on where he should have done. So yeah, I'd still say there's a lot of choice there, but at the same time, there aren't enough players who are absolutely standing out and saying this is rely on us to be the World Cup winning midfield.
Yeah, there's still plenty of questions there, isn't it? I think that some of the players just need maybe a good run, a bit of a confidence boost. I mean, the main one many will point out really is the one you mentioned who did come on, which is Paul Pogba. You would think that he should be the proverbial starter, but he's really lost a lot of form in the last 3 months, and is not necessarily a nailed-on starter for Manchester United at the moment, and they don't really have a manager that helps boost his confidence in any kind of way at the moment either. But then you look at the other options, that the young options at least that they have, and Tolisso's a great option to have, but many at Bayern Munich would say he's very much a third, possibly even fourth choice, really, because they play a three-man midfield with Javi Martinez and Arturo Vidal and James Rodriguez as the three at the moment, and then they would instantly say the first person to come in out of that is Thiago Alcantara, which leaves Tolisso as essentially the fifth option, really, in midfield for them at the moment. So he's not really getting the game time in the big games that maybe he needs at the moment. And the same with Adrien Rabiot, who's just sort of been pushed to different positions at Paris Saint-Germain. Sometimes he's a defensive midfielder, sometimes he's a box-to-box midfielder. He's gone missing in the last couple of games, big games especially. He's not had the greatest of second halves of seasons after especially being really, really excellent last season. It's not been his calendar year at all. And that
the one thing I'd say in Rabiot's defence is I think he's been PSG in the big matches, in the Champions League matches. I think he's been underrated, PSG's best player of the last 2 or 3 years. It didn't happen against Real Madrid, and it's almost to his, obviously to PSG as a club's, but certainly to his, and maybe in a similar way Kurzawa and Kimpembe's detriment, that PSG haven't gone further into the competition because they're being given less chance to prove what they can do at the very highest level. So Rabiot, I think he probably will make the squad, but in terms of being a starter, he really has to. If he starts on tomorrow, I think he has to have a stellar game, and for the rest of the season, he's going to have to as well. But again, is that enough? Doing it as he said, doing it against Dijon, but not doing it against Real Madrid. So yeah, I think it would take something special for him to break into the starting lineup for the start of the World Cup.
It's certainly the area of the pitch where I think there's the most to debate. We know who are going to be in that attacking selection. We just don't know from who. There's obviously a huge number, but we know that. I think with the midfield there is the potential for a slight unknown entity, or a dark horse could make a very, very late run for this. Defense seems to be limited by just pure numbers and availability and personnel. But I think
there's a lot of centre-back choices, just not fullbacks.
There's a lot of centre-back choices, yes, but I think there's not too many realistic centre-back choices with how rigid I think Deschamps' selection has been in that area. We know, Laporte would be in probably any other team in the world by now. At the minute, he's not being considered. There's then a whole host of sort of 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds who would be bordering on the fringe. But we know that those 4 centre-backs are pretty much nailed on. But I just think there's enough room in that midfield that I would argue that if you were to say that you were going to take 6, it depends how you classify a player like Lamar. But I think if you were to potentially push Lamar into a more attacking role and used your 6 as you saw your sort of more defensively minded or box-to-box midfielders, I think you could probably only say 3 maybe would be nailed on, I think, and that's Pogba, Kante, and I do think Tolisso is a nailed on player. I think what he brings in terms of versatility and what I think he brings to the work ethic, which is obviously something that Deschamps is particularly keen to preserve and push as a key factor for why he picks players. I think
he played quite a lot of left back in his first couple of seasons at Lyon. Maybe that could be an option.
But I think what that then leaves is minimum 2, arguably 3 positions that I don't think are nailed on. At the minute it's looking likely that Matuidi and Rabiot will take up those 2, but I think you could make a strong case that neither. Certainly, I think Matuidi will only get there for the experience that he brings. But it's that toss-up, isn't it? Do you rely just on experience, or do you look at form? Do you look at talent? If you're looking at those latter 2 categories for why you'd select someone, I don't think Matuidi's in that squad. I think Rabiot, if he makes it, will probably be by the skin of his teeth. I think slightly off-field antics or his image and how that's perhaps portrayed goes against a little what Deschamps wants, sort of preaches about this squad. But I think gets in there through what we know he could. There's almost a bit of potential, I think, is the reason why he's there. I don't necessarily think that we've seen enough of it, but we know, he can be a really, really good player. But then there is a whole host of other players who are, really on that fringe, who I genuinely think could make a late push for that team because of what they can bring. You look at someone like Matuidi. Well, there's people like Nzonzi, there's people like Kondogbia that can do sort of that role that Matuidi does and better. They're in form, they're playing. They've got experience at domestic level. So I think that's certainly the area of Deschamps' squad where I think there's enough to have a sort of quite a lengthy debate about.
Yeah, there's certainly some interesting things. And I wish you could have this many options speaking about the England team, but never mind. We can't. Beggars can't be choosers sometimes. But let's look at the game ahead.
Oh, and you're not picking Duncan Murray. You must have a great squad.
Well, yeah, especially the first one. I make them the second one's maybe a little bit old now. The game ahead is an interesting one, though. This one, Jeremy, really, because obviously they're facing Russia in St. Petersburg, which is important because it's important to acclimatise yourself. Obviously, it'll be a little bit different when they do head there in the summer. It'll likely be a tad warmer, at least anyway. But acclimatising to the city around them and the stadium and the fans of Russia and what they are to expect. That's one part of the game, but also against a decent side that will be very much up for trying to get these. They played Brazil in the last game as well. As they want to get big teams and big experience ahead of their World Cup campaign that matters so much to them. But an interesting one on a number of levels, not just for squad now for France, but also to acclimatise to what they can expect from the pitches, from the stadium, from the city, from the country itself ahead of the World Cup.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few sort of subplots, if that's the right sort of phrase for it. I think I agree with what Rich said right at the start, that at this stage, and certainly in a World Cup year, the performances and the lessons learned are more important than results. And certainly if France learn not to switch off and also learn to be a little bit more physical, if they take that lesson from the Colombia match, then it will stand them in good stead. At the same time, I thought, but going into these two matches, I kind of thought would be a decent win against Colombia, and then they can afford to possibly underperform against Russia and use all those other things about learning curve, and it's more important to get to know Russia and acclimatized conditions and things like that. Now I feel in terms of morale, it's actually quite important to get a result there as well. Partly also because Russia, I think, have been quite badly affected by injuries. As you said, they're coming off a pretty bad defeat against Brazil. So I think it will be setting a bad tone if France come out of these two matches with only either two defeats or just a draw to show for it. But at the same time, what is more important is Deschamps being able to see some of these possibly fringe players, see what they can do. From the predicted lineup, Ben Yedder won't be getting a start, but hopefully he'll be able to show a little bit more of his ability. As Rich said, Pavard certainly, and Hernandez as well. You've got a lot to play for. So if they perform well, it's a throwback. I think it was one of the last pre-World Cup friendlies in '98, maybe. It's 98 or 2000 was against Russia and kind of did for a lot of players. I think we lost 1-0 and Letizi made a big mistake and sort of never made the France squad again after that. So there is a little bit of a historical precedent for how important a pre-World Cup match against away to Russia can be. So yeah, certainly, obviously with the context of it being World Cup year and also in the context of coming off this defeat to Colombia, it takes on quite an important match, even though it is just a friendly sort of early in the calendar year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd like to mention that the Russia have lost one of their more influential players, haven't they? Alexander Kokorin is not going to make the tournament anymore, the striker, and that is a hefty blow for them. And they're really up against it already, really, in a competitive group is maybe the best way to put it for them. And it'd be a big test for them. But Rich, what do you think ahead of this one? I mean, the Colombia defeat was disappointing, especially to go ahead and looking so dominant and then allowing it to slip. This is a chance for them to bounce back, and also, like I mentioned earlier, a chance for them to test out Russia themselves a little bit.
I'm encouraged by what we're seeing from the potential lineup, as Jez alluded to earlier. Front three of Dembele, Mbappe, Martial perhaps gives a hint of. I don't think a Giroud-less starting 11 will happen really at the World Cup, but I think it's certainly a case of, well, that's a Euro 2020 team to look at. I don't think post World Cup the likes of Giroud, Koscielny, Matuidi, I don't think they're going to be around. So I'm excited to see what this can, if that is the front three, excited to see what that can do. If they can perform well, maybe, maybe it does give Deschamps food for thought in terms of as an alternative, maybe a plan B, or maybe even a sort of plan A Mark II, something like that maybe. So I'm looking forward to seeing how they perform, really looking forward to seeing how Pavard and Hernandez can perform. I'm looking for a response from sort of the more senior players. So it looks like Umtiti's going to play again. I want him to now step up and recognise, I had a bad game against Colombia. I'm going to rectify that and show that I have learnt those lessons. From all accounts, they got a proper rollicking from Deschamps after the game. So it's going to be interesting to see how those players who started that game or played a part in that game can react to that. So I think it's important that we see that reaction. We've now got to see a positive performance. We know France can come out and start games well. We saw that against Colombia. It's then, once perhaps one or two changes get made, keeping that tempo up, keeping that performance up, so that they don't fall asleep. As Jez said, taking the lessons that you've learned from previous games is the key to being successful in tournament football. So if Deschamps and his team can prove, we had a bad day bad half a day at the office against Colombia, we've learned from that. We're going to put in a full proper shift against Russia and show that, we're rightfully considered one of the favourites. Again, as Jez said, I don't think they're. I think you should be looking at them as the big favourite, but I think they certainly are one of the sort of 4 or 5 that are in with a shout to win it. So I'm looking for that reaction. In short, is the answer to the question tomorrow. I want that reaction. I want the performance, and I really want those players who are not quite 100% sure of their World Cup spots to really stand up and give a good account of themselves.
Certainly going to be an interesting one, really. The last thing I wanted to discuss, really, before chatting about one of the players that maybe has a contention of getting into the squad late on to Russia, and that is Didier Deschamps himself, because after this game he did come out and did the right kind of things. He said the players were reacting exactly to what he was saying, that this was a wake-up call really for them, this result, and he doesn't expect the standards to drop again, because like many are expecting, they are one of the favourites for the tournament. They are highly touted as a sort of not just a dark horse, but within the sort of top 3 or 4 teams to win the entire tournament, especially given it's in Europe as well. But Jeremy, what do you think about the pressures on Didier Deschamps at the moment? I mean, many will still point, even though, like you mentioned earlier, that it may be a little bit unfavourably, that he obviously lost the European Championship final that maybe should have won, and many thought that they should have really walked to, at least anyway. And this, again, with the talent that he has on there, he has a lot of pressure to, at a very, very minimum, reach a semi-finals, you would think. Is that weighing on him, given that result of the weekend, reminding him that maybe at the moment his squad's not there?
I'm not sure about weighing on him. I think that he's got the France job. He's earned it. He's earned it from the point of view of what he's done for France as a player, for France as a manager up till now. I think that he lost to Portugal in the Euro final, but he got further than teams like Spain and Italy and Germany, who, on paper they're all better than Portugal. And so it was just one of those quirks, I think, that they lost that final. They've come from a long way back. Remember when he took over, they'd sort of just started to get back on their feet under Blanc from the whole sort of disaster of the Domenech era. And he's really pushed them back to the forefront of world football, which obviously is a lot to do with the players, but I think his role in that is probably underrated, if anything. He's certainly got the support of the FFF president. So, and he's got his new contract, so he's sort of not in danger of losing his job. I think he's a decent guy. I think if France underperform, he'll fall on his sword anyway. So in terms of that, I don't think there's too much pressure. The pressure comes with the fact that he has got a very talented squad, and I do think that, depending on the quirks of the draw, I do think that while certainly I wouldn't put them amongst the 2 or 3 favourites to win the tournament, I really think they should be aiming for semi-finals as a minimum. I do think he's capable of doing that. The problem is that he's never going to be the most expansive manager. So as long as he's winning and as long as he's playing defensively and winning, he won't get too much stick. But he's certainly not the first manager to experience this. Fans and media will tolerate less exciting performances if there's the results to back it up. But if France do slip up at any point, then straight away that his more defensive setup is going to be used as a stick to beat him with. But everyone knows what you're going to get with Deschamps. He was that type of player, and he's always been that type of coach. He won the league with Marseille, not playing the best football. I'm not sure at the time there were too many Marseille fans complaining when it was their first league win for 20 odd years. So you can sort of string out all the cliches. It's a results business, and certainly as an international manager, you get one chance every 2 years, but only one coach in the whole world can walk away with a trophy at the end of it, which means that there's a hell of a lot of talented managers and players who will be trophyless. He just needs to make sure that France, on any given day, are capable of beating any other team. And I think he's proved that in the past. The semi-final of the Euros, everyone said as you said, lots of people said they should have walked away with the championship. In the semi-final, I think it was very clear that Germany are a hell of a lot of a better team than France, but he and the team found a way to beat them. Unfortunately, Portugal did the same to France in the final, but I think he has shown that he does have the nous. Within France, it's well known that there's, I think it's a phrase like la dèche or something, that Deschamps has, he seems to have a hell of a lot of good luck that follows him around and has done all the way through his career. I'm not saying that he should be in the job purely because of superstition or anything like that, but I think it's more than coincidence that he is a serial winner wherever he's gone as a player and a coach. And I think he's earned the right to take France into this World Cup, and probably earned the right to have a little bit more faith in his ability than some people are showing.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, really, Rich, because heading into the tournament, there'll be a lot of pressure on him to get far again. So the real question, I think, on this one, from our point of view, because he obviously does have a contract with the French FA that does extend past the World Cup, although there is get-outs and so forth, as there is in many contracts. But to say if he reaches the quarter-final and they drop out, is that maybe a situation where either him or the French authorities sort of decided that maybe he's taken it as far as he can?
I think the noises coming out of the French Football Federation would indicate that I think the only way that they would act is a sort of group stage elimination. They seem to be very, very big supporters of Deschamps. They've backed him throughout his entire career as France coach. So they have backed him to the hill. They are the ones that have given him this new contract. For them to act and look at instigating a sacking would be group stage elimination. But as Jez pointed out, I think if that happened, Deschamps would be resigning. I think before a firing came in. Similarly, I think perhaps second round would perhaps be the same from Deschamps quitting. I think quarterfinals and beyond. I think looking at what can happen in those 2 years up to the 2020 European Championships, and with so many youngsters coming through, and as I mentioned earlier, a couple of senior players who won't be there. Maybe quarterfinals would be enough for him to stay in. That he would want to stay in the job to sort of try and follow through with something, and enough that the French Football Federation would keep him on board. I would agree with Jez. They have to be targeting minimum semi-finals. I can't recall off the top of my head how kind or unkind that draw could be to get to that stage. But they have the squad. They have a top 5, top 4, top 5 squad. They just have to have that little bit of luck. They have to have Deschamps, not only the players, but Deschamps himself at the top of his game. But I mean, the argument I've always said, and this is not a way for me to say that Deschamps should have the job, because that would sound like I'm doing him a grave disservice, which I'm absolutely not. But I genuinely don't know who the alternative would be. If he does go in whatever form, about being sacked or resign after the World Cup, I genuinely don't know who comes in to replace him. I really, really don't. So I'm always open to hearing thoughts on who that person would be, because right now I genuinely couldn't give you a genuinely serious candidate to take over from him.
And that seems to be always the question, I suppose, at international level, is who's the next in line. But we'll move on to our final part of this evening. That's our Plane to Russia segment, we missed out last week, but we have, I think, a really excellent option given the talk about midfield we had earlier and the players that they're obviously out of form at the moment. But one man who is French and is definitely not out of form at the moment is Geoffrey Kondogbia. He's been absolutely excellent for Valencia, a real renaissance given his time at Inter previously, especially. We obviously remember him more from this show and ourselves from his stint with Monaco in Ligue 1 especially. But I'll start with you, Rich. What do you think about Kondogbia's chances for Russia? And do you think he's maybe someone who's deserving of a place in that midfield options?
I would like to see him being given a very, very serious thought as to being included. We saw at his time with Monaco just how good of a player he can be, and his time in Spain before that. Got his big move to Inter Milan. That, unfortunately for him, didn't work out. Has gone back to Spain now with Valencia and is playing really, really well. To have come back from, that knock that spell with Inter would have undoubtedly caused him mentally, I think shows great character. I think the fact he's playing well, with Valencia, and we know from previous teams that he's played with, what a talented player he is. And then we've also seen, on the bigger stages. So he's not had a lot of opportunity at international level, but we cast your mind. It seems years and years and years ago now, but cast your mind back to the Champions League game against Arsenal, and he was absolutely unbelievable in that. Certainly that fixture at the Emirates, he was absolutely fantastic. And I just think what he can offer that French side, he's cliched, I know, but he's a really strong player. He's good on the ball, distribution, powerful, can get forward, can get back. It's a little frustrating that he's been not taken more seriously, I think, by Deschamps. And I really would have liked to have seen him included in the squad for these two friendlies. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think he can offer what Matuidi offers and more. Obviously, the only thing he can't offer is that international experience, but he can offer, the energy that certainly Matuidi of sort of 3-4 years ago was giving France. And sadly, I think it may prove too late, but I'm hoping that he's one of those players that can have that sort of final sort of run of good form towards the end of the season that actually pushes him as a surprise pick. But he should be considered, I think, without a doubt.
It's an interesting one, really, isn't it? Just because I suppose the argument against him would be obviously that given his recent stint at Inter and the sort of transformation he's gone under, that maybe this might be the hint of maybe more of a one-season wonder and a bit of a risk to take to a World Cup, that he might dip back into that form that we saw while he was in Italy.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. One-season wonder seems harsh because he's had good seasons before for Monaco and Seville, but he does seem a very sort of confidence-based player whose form does fluctuate quite wildly. To be fair, not sort of from one week to the next. It seems to be more kind of one season to the next. And so the positive side of that is that he's had a very strong season. The negative side, I guess, is just looking at his stats overall. He's now played sort of well over 200 matches in his career, and he's played at the highest level, sort of league-wise, in La Liga, Liga, Serie A. But in terms of, sort of international, but also sort of Champions League experience, he's actually quite raw, and I don't know if that's kind of what's holding him back in Deschamps' eyes. That Monaco playing, he did have that fantastic game against Arsenal, but I suppose in a way that was as the plucky underdog. But when he's played for Inter and really had the chance to make a name for himself at the very, very top of European names, it didn't quite work out, and possibly Deschamps thinking he's not proven enough for me that I can bring into a World Cup. I mean, obviously the thing about that is that it applies to quite a few players in the France team. So maybe that's a harsh view to take. I'm just trying to see why Deschamps wouldn't be picking him, because I do think based on this season and the season that Valencia are having as well, he probably deserved for Deschamps to have a look at him within this squad with these two matches. The fact that he hasn't been picked for them, I think, makes it probably unlikely, unless a couple of other players' form drops off even more and he really maintains or improves it for the rest of the season. I think it's unlikely that Deschamps is going to bring in a player like that. Possibly he may bring in, I hope he doesn't, but he may bring in, say, Payet, who isn't in this squad, but he knows very well what he can do. I think it's unlikely that a complete newcomer from left field will be in Deschamps' squad. So I think maybe he should be booking his summer holidays elsewhere.
That's the thing for a lot of them at this moment in time who are on the outside looking in, is that obviously with this being the last one before the season ends, and the friendlies in late May really being the precursors to what you would want to test your 23 to 25 man squad that you're going to have for the tournament, really. So that does make it a lot more difficult for someone like Kondogbia. But I'll give an honest assessment now. We'll sort of sum this one up. Rich, in your opinion, does he make the plane?
In my opinion, I would take him. If I was in Deschamps' position, I would look at taking him. Looking at Deschamps, though, from the outside looking in, sadly, I think he's just going to miss out. But I do think he will be in that first reserve bracket.
Jeremy, what do you think?
Yeah, similar answer. I don't think he will be in the squad, but I think he's more deserving of a place than a couple of midfielders who probably will be.
I agree with you too. I would pick him. I personally think as well, if Deschamps was maybe looking at this a little bit further, that out of the midfielders that they've got, and including him as well, he not only works as an option, possibly as an energy man next to Kanté, but he's probably the only one out of those options, really. Tolisso, Rabiot, Pogba, and Matuidi himself. He's probably the closest to being able to replace Kanté if they needed to than any of them. He's more defensively minded, and we saw that a lot at Monaco. Obviously, he sort of adapted it a little bit more at Valencia, of being more of a box-to-box player again, and that flexibility, I think, especially in European, world competitions in this case, is really invaluable, especially when you know that you have a squad of 23, and if someone like Kanté goes down, it completely changes their options, really, because you would think that, and it's strange to think it, that if he did go down, they kind of have to transfer him into a three-man midfield, you would think, because they don't really have the options to just have a specialist defender like him. And maybe Kondogbia could be someone that could do that kind of role if they needed him to. But we shall wait and see if he maybe makes the extended squad. Go ahead, Rich.
If they wanted to just carry on that Deschamps, lucky mascot theory, it may or may not be worth just noting that if he were to join up with the current squad as it looks, with Pogba and Titi Dean and Tovan, that makes up a pretty significant core of that 2013 under-20 World Cup winning team. So Deschamps, obviously, with his belief that squad harmony and everybody getting along and it all fits together well off the pitch as well as on the pitch, they've grown up playing international football level, at youth level, and have experience of tournament and have experience of winning tournaments as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one going in the choices that he'll need to make, at least anyway. But we shall hopefully see a little bit more in this game against Russia, and maybe a little bit more in those friendlies in May, at least when they have a kind of expanded squad that a lot of the nations do. That's all that we have time for this week. My thanks to Rich, Jeremy, and all of you listening at home. Do join us for the preview show on Thursday, where we will talk about that game against Russia and the Liga on weekend that is coming up soon. But for now, join us for Monday again at the same time, same place next week. A bientôt and goodbye.